96% of you are not subscribed to the channel. When I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will share a series of exclusive stories. Subscribe now. The stars stretched endlessly above me, scattered across the ink-black sky of Varyan 4. The colony planet, tucked away in the far reaches of the Andromeda sector, was quiet at night, the kind of stillness that almost demanded reflection. I leaned against the rail of my modest balcony, nursing a cup of synthetic coffee, and let the gentle hum of the nearby forest wash over me. Life here was simple, far removed from the bustling research facilities I'd been accustomed to back on Earth. I had come to Varyan 4 for solitude and purpose. The colony had been established only a few decades ago, a project to explore sustainable living on planets with minimal technological interference. As a xenobiologist, I was drawn to the challenge of studying the ecosystem here, a world so pristine it felt like stepping into an ancient era. What I hadn't expected was the neighbor. Liara lived in the home just beyond the fields separating our dwellings. Her kind, humanoids with shimmering indigo skin and delicate, bioluminescent patterns that shifted with their emotions, were native to Varyan 4. The Illyrians, as they were called, were elusive and known for their strict adherence to tradition. The colony administration had stressed the importance of respecting their boundaries, and as far as I could tell, Liara embodied their reserved nature to perfection. I saw her often. She tended to her garden in the mornings, her movements graceful and deliberate, her expression inscrutable. On rare occasions, our paths crossed when I ventured to the communal well. She would nod politely, her silver hair catching the sunlight, but her responses to my attempts at small talk were curt, almost mechanical. If it weren't for her occasional sidelong glances, quick, almost imperceptible, I might have assumed she found my presence intolerable. That changed one evening. It started subtly. Liara began spending more time outside, often in the evenings when the sky turned a fiery orange. I'd catch her looking toward my home, her bioluminescent patterns faintly flickering. There was a restlessness in her, a tension I couldn't quite place. Curiosity got the better of me one day, and I decided to greet her as she worked in her garden. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound casual as I approached the edge of her property. She looked up, startled, her hands pausing mid-motion over the strange flowering plant she was tending. Her patterns flickered, a soft blue that reminded me of rippling water. "Ryan Carter," she said, her voice measured but soft. "What brings you here?" I gestured vaguely toward her garden. "Just admiring your work. These plants, they're native to this planet, right?" Liara hesitated, as if debating whether to answer. Finally, she nodded. "Yes. They are called Varian. They bloom only during the preparation season." "Preparation season?" I echoed, intrigued. The phrase was unfamiliar, and the scientist in me couldn't resist probing further. "It is," Liara trailed off, her eyes darting away. "A time when my kind readies itself for biological cycles." Her tone suggested she had said more than she intended. She quickly returned her focus to the plant, her movements brisk and precise. I sensed the conversation was over, but I couldn't shake the curiosity that lingered. What biological cycles? Why did she seem so guarded about them? Over the next few days, I noticed the change not just in Liara, but in the environment itself. The air grew warmer, tinged with a faint, almost electric charge. The forest around the colony seemed more alive, the calls of alien creatures sharper, more insistent. Even the plants seemed to respond, their blooms brighter and their scents more potent. Liara, too, seemed different. She was more restless, often pacing near the edge of her property, her patterns flickering erratically. When we crossed paths again, she barely acknowledged me, her demeanor distant and distracted. One evening, I found her standing at the edge of the field, staring out at the horizon where the twin moons of Varyan 4 hung low in the sky. Her bioluminescence was brighter than I had ever seen it, a mesmerizing display of swirling hues that pulsed like a living kaleidoscope. "Liara," I called out as I approached. "Is everything all right?" She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability in her eyes, a crack in the composed facade she usually wore. "You should not be here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is dangerous." "Dangerous?" I asked, confused. "What's going on?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether to explain. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. It is the season of alignment. My kind, we are affected by it in ways you would not understand. It is best if you keep your distance. Her words were cryptic, but her tone carried an unmistakable warning. Yet something in the way she looked at me, pleading, almost desperate, kept me rooted to the spot. Liara, I said gently, if something is happening, maybe I can help. You cannot help, she snapped, her patterns flaring with a burst of fiery orange. The sudden intensity of her reaction startled me, and she seemed to regret it immediately. She looked away, her bioluminescence dimming to a subdued blue. I am sorry, she said quietly. This is difficult for me. Please, Ryan, trust me when I say that your presence only complicates things. Despite her words, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. There was a vulnerability in her that called to me, a sense that beneath her guarded exterior was someone struggling with more than she could handle alone. I'll give you space, I said finally, but if you need anything, anything at all, you know where to find me. She didn't respond, but as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of her bioluminescence flickering faintly, a soft, hesitant green. As Liara explained the significance of the forest, her voice held a mixture of urgency and trepidation. The rare plant she spoke of, the Sivrin bloom, only flowered once during the alignment season, hidden deep within the dense, untamed wilderness of Varyan IV. According to her, its properties could help calm her instincts, allowing her to regain control during this tumultuous time. But retrieving it was no simple task. The forest was as dangerous as it was beautiful. I adjusted the straps of my survival pack and nodded, ready to follow her lead. Are you sure this is the only way? I asked. It's the best way, she replied, her violet eyes scanning the forest's edge. If we wait any longer, the bloom will wither. And I don't think I can endure this without it. Her honesty caught me off guard, as did the vulnerability in her tone. This wasn't the composed and distant Liara I'd first met. She was allowing herself to be raw, unguarded. And I couldn't turn my back on her now. The forest swallowed us whole as soon as we stepped past the tree line. The canopy overhead was dense, casting the undergrowth in shifting patterns of dim green and gold light. The air smelled rich, earthy, alive. It was humid, with a strange stillness that prickled at the edges of my senses, as if the forest itself were watching. Liara moved gracefully despite the uneven terrain, her lithe frame weaving through the twisted roots and thick ferns with an ease I could only envy. I stumbled more than once, and each time she glanced back with a faint smirk that softened her sharp features. You're not used to this kind of environment, she said, her voice tinged with amusement. Not exactly, I admitted. My idea of a wilderness adventure is camping near a river, not trekking through an alien jungle where everything could kill me. Her laugh was soft but genuine, and it warmed me despite the damp air. Stay close, human. I'll keep you alive. We pressed on, the atmosphere around us growing thicker, more oppressive. The deeper we went, the more alien the landscape became. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the trunks of ancient trees, casting faint glows in hues of blue and violet. In the distance, I heard the occasional rustle of movement, creatures we couldn't see but knew were there. Despite the unease, I found myself captivated by the beauty of it all. Liara, too, seemed to change here. Her usual restraint gave way to a kind of quiet awe. She touched the bark of a glowing tree, her fingers trailing along its surface as if it held memories she alone could decipher. This forest, she said softly, is sacred to my people. It's alive in ways most wouldn't understand. It feels alive, I replied, glancing around. Almost like it's watching us. She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told me she agreed. After what felt like hours of walking, the path grew steeper, the air cooler. Liara paused, her posture tense. We're close, she said. But this is where it gets dangerous. I swallowed hard. Define dangerous. Predators. The Sivrin bloom draws them as much as it draws us. I nodded, gripping the plasma blade at my side a little tighter. I guess I'll earn my keep then. Liara gave me a fleeting smile, one that seemed to say she appreciated the sentiment, even if she doubted my ability to back it up. Together, we pressed on. The clearing where the bloom grew was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A pool of luminous water sat at its center, its surface rippling with an unseen current. Around it, the Sivrin blooms glowed faintly, their petals shimmering like starlight. It was breathtaking and eerily silent. Liara stepped forward cautiously, her hand hovering over her sidearm. "Stay close," she whispered. "They'll come." No sooner had she spoken than the first shadow moved. A hulking beast, all claws and scales, emerged from the undergrowth with a guttural snarl. My pulse skyrocketed as two more creatures joined it, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on us. "They hunt in packs," Liara said, drawing her weapon. "We'll have to fight." The next few moments were a blur of chaos and adrenaline. Liara moved with a precision that left me awestruck, her plasma rifle firing bursts of energy that lit up the clearing. I did my best to keep up, my blade slicing through the air as I deflected one creature's snapping jaws. We fought side by side, her movements fluid and lethal, mine clumsy but determined. When the last predator fell, I was gasping for breath, my arms trembling from exertion. Liara, though battered, remained poised. She approached the Sivrin bloom and carefully harvested one of its flowers, cradling it as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. "You did well," she said, turning to me with a rare, genuine smile. "Thank you." "Just another day in the jungle," I replied weakly, leaning on my knees to catch my breath. Her laugh was soft but warm, and as the tension of the fight faded, something shifted between us. The way she looked at me now wasn't distant or guarded, it was open, searching. Without thinking, I reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. Her skin was cool to the touch, but the way she leaned into my hand sent a warmth spiraling through me. "Liara," I began, my voice barely audible. She stepped closer, her violet eyes locking onto mine. "Ryan," she said, her tone low and uncertain, as though speaking my name aloud was a leap she wasn't sure she was ready to take. For a moment, the world around us disappeared. It was just her, the faint glow of the bloom in her hands, and the steady rhythm of her breathing. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, she closed the distance between us. Her lips were cool, her kiss tentative yet electric. It was as though she were testing the waters, unsure of how far she could go. I responded without hesitation, my hands finding her waist as the bloom slipped from her fingers. The world seemed to hold its breath as we gave in to the pull between us. When we finally broke apart, her expression was a mixture of wonder and fear. "This changes things," she whispered. "Maybe it's supposed to," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She nodded, and though uncertainty lingered in her eyes, there was also a spark of hope. "We should go," she said. "The predators will return." Together, we left the clearing, the blooms safely tucked away and an unspoken understanding between us. The journey back through the forest was quieter, our steps falling into a rhythm that felt natural, almost intimate. Though the dangers of the forest loomed around us, I couldn't bring myself to feel fear, not with her beside me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: this connection, fragile as it was worth fighting for. The journey back through the forest was surreal. The dense canopy overhead filtered the light into fragmented beams, casting shimmering patterns on the ground. Liara walked ahead, her steps deliberate but lighter than before. She clutched the Sivrin bloom carefully, as if it were not just a plant but a lifeline. I couldn't stop replaying the moment we shared. The feel of her cool lips against mine, the unspoken promise in her violet eyes. It wasn't just the kiss that lingered, it was the shift in her demeanor, the way she allowed herself to be vulnerable, not just as a woman but as someone burdened by the expectations of her people. For the first time, it felt like we were equals navigating the unknown together. "You're quiet," I said, breaking the stillness. She glanced back at me briefly, her expression unreadable. "I'm thinking about..." Her pace slowed as she turned to face me fully. The glow of bioluminescent fungi painted her silver hair with soft blues and greens. "About what this means," she said quietly. "For me. For us." I took a deep breath, stepping closer. "We'll figure it out. Together." Her lips twitched in what might have been the shadow of a smile. "You make it sound simple. It doesn't have to be complicated." She sighed, her gaze flicking to the Sivrin bloom. "In my culture, emotions, attachments, are viewed as weaknesses. I've spent my life trying to suppress them, to live up to the expectations of my people. But with you, she trailed off, the words hanging between us. You don't have to fight this alone, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw her walls crumble completely. But then the distant howl of a predator echoed through the trees, pulling us back to the reality of the forest. Without another word, she turned and resumed walking, and I followed, determined to see this through. By the time we emerged from the forest, the twin suns of Varyan IV were beginning to set, casting the horizon in hues of amber and violet. The silhouette of my small cabin came into view, a humble structure against the vast wilderness. For the first time, it felt like more than just a refuge. It felt like home. As we approached, I couldn't help but notice how Liara's steps slowed, her gaze flicking toward the cabin with a mixture of apprehension and something else. Reluctance, perhaps? She had spent so much of her time here hiding her true self, but now the barriers she had placed between us were beginning to fall. Inside, the familiar warmth of the cabin enveloped us. Liara carefully placed the Sivrin bloom on the small table, its faint luminescence casting a soft glow. I busied myself stoking the fire, giving her a moment to gather her thoughts. When I finally turned, she was standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared out into the fading light. What happens now? I asked, keeping my voice gentle. She didn't turn, but I saw her shoulders tense. I use the bloom, she said, almost mechanically. Its properties should calm the cycles, give me control. And after that? Her silence stretched, heavy and uncertain. Finally, she turned, her violet eyes meeting mine. My people won't approve of this. Of us. They'll see it as a betrayal of our ways. I crossed the room, closing the distance between us. Then we'll deal with it. Together. Her gaze searched mine, as if looking for a reason to believe me. You don't understand what you're saying. The consequences could be severe, for both of us. Maybe. But if we let fear dictate everything, what kind of life are we really living? I reached out, taking her hand in mine. Liara, you've spent so much of your life trying to be what they expect you to be. Maybe it's time to be who you want to be. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. Instead, she stepped closer, her cool hand tightening around mine. And if I want this? She asked softly, her voice barely audible. If I want you? I smiled, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. Then I'm yours. Over the next few days, Liara and I worked together to prepare the bloom. Its properties were as potent as she'd hoped, and as she consumed the prepared elixir, I could see the change in her almost immediately. The tension that had gripped her eased, the sharp edges of her instincts softened. For the first time since we met, she seemed at peace. But with peace came decisions. One evening, as we sat by the fire, she finally broached the subject. Ryan, she began, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension, I need to return to my people. I felt my heart sink, but I kept my expression neutral. I figured you'd have to eventually. Her gaze flicked to mine, searching. I want you to come with me. The words caught me off guard. To your home. She nodded. They need to see that this, she gestured between us, isn't a weakness. That humans aren't what they think. If I can show them what I've learned, maybe things can change. The idea of standing before her people, of being judged by a society that viewed me as little more than an inferior outsider, was daunting. But as I looked at her, at the quiet determination in her eyes, I knew there was only one answer. I'll go, I said. Whatever it takes. The journey to Liara's homeworld was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Her people's technology was far more advanced than anything I'd seen, and their capital, a sprawling city of crystalline structures and bioluminescent flora, was breathtaking. But beneath the beauty lay an undercurrent of tension. The moment we arrived, it was clear we were not welcome. Liara's superiors, elders who governed her people, granted her an audience reluctantly. They viewed me with thinly veiled disdain, their disapproval palpable as I stood beside her in the grand chamber. But Liara was unshaken. She spoke with conviction, recounting our journey and what she had learned during her time on Varyan IV. Humans are not what we were taught to believe, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. They possess qualities we've dismissed: resilience, compassion, courage. I've seen it firsthand, and it has changed me." The elders exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. Finally, one of them spoke. "And what do you propose, Liara?" "That we abandon our ways for the sake of a single human." "No," she replied. "I propose that we evolve. That we open ourselves to understanding, to connection. Because if we don't, we risk stagnation and isolation." The chamber fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I didn't know what to expect, but in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride in her. After what felt like an eternity, the head elder spoke. "Your request is unconventional, but your conviction is admirable. We will deliberate." Days turned into weeks, and though the elder's decision was slow in coming, the time we spent together solidified what we already knew. We were better together. When the elders finally delivered their verdict, conditional acceptance of our bond, it felt like the first step toward something greater. As Liara and I returned to Varyan 4, the air between us was lighter, filled with possibility. The forest that had once seemed so foreboding now felt like a sanctuary, a reminder of where our journey had begun. One evening, as we sat by the fire in the cabin, Liara leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. The stars outside were brilliant, scattered across the night sky like a promise of endless adventures to come. "I never thought I'd find this," she said softly. "A home. A partner." I kissed the top of her head, pulling her closer. "Neither did I. But I'm glad we did." And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our bond, unexpected, unconventional, had become our greatest strength. Together, we had found not just love, but a home in each other. And that was more than enough. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this story, please like it and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.